What do you do when the pressures of life become overwhelming and you find yourself spiraling into anxiety and depression? For Dr. Ebony Stone, the journey to resilience began with a diagnosis that opened her eyes to the impact of high functioning anxiety. Married to her best friend for 22 years and the mother of three beautiful children, Dr. Stone has an impressive educational background, holding both an MBA and a DBA. With extensive experience leading dynamic teams across various sectors, her passion for leadership is evident. Join us as we explore her powerful story of overcoming personal challenges and her insights on building resilience through prayer, therapy, and the innovative framework she developed called Pause.
Sometimes life gives us lemons. Sometimes it gives us lemonade. Other times it gives us something entirely out of left field that makes us say, WTF. But no matter what obstacles come, there is most often a way out on the other side, and we are once again victorious. My name is Dr. Rowe, and you are listening to my podcast about resilience. Every guest shares a tragedy to triumph story to give listeners like you the inspiration to push through every single day. Listen now as my next guest shares how they were life-jacked.
Hi, Dr. Stone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Such a wonderful opportunity to have you on the show. Now, Dr. Stone, can you start by sharing a bit about your family and how they supported you throughout your journey?
Absolutely. I would love to. One of the things that people who've worked with me can tell you is that my family comes first. So talking about them is super easy. Like you said, I am married to my very best friend. We've been married coming up on 23 years. It'll be 23 years here in a couple of months.
Wow,
And thank you. Thank you. We really, I feel like our marriage is successful because our friendship was successful first, and because we believe that there should be three entities in our marriage, us and God. And that keeps us grounded in our marriage, rooted in our faith. And we have three beautiful children. My oldest son is 24. He is a budding photographer. He actually worked with me this weekend as my personal photographer, and that was a moment of pride for Mom. I have a 19-year-old who is a budding entrepreneur. She is a hairstylist, and she's doing great things. And then our baby boy is 16, and he is our musical and bowling prodigy. And so they keep us busy. But I also have, I was going to say extended. They're not extended. I have some immediate family right here in the area. My husband and I made the decision when we started to grow our family that we wanted to be close to our parents, and we didn't want to leave. And they have played a tremendous role in our lives growing as a couple, and also in the lives of their grandchildren or nieces and nephews. So my mom is here. My husband's mother is here. My dad, before he passed away, played a huge part. And then we have brothers that are here as well, and they have supported me through every phase of the journey.
I love that you said that there are three people that are in your relationship. And I definitely can tell you that that is a love triangle. I think every married couple needs to be in. And you said that is you, your husband, and God. And
Absolutely.
Is that a decision that you all came to together? Is that something that came over time?
It's a great question. It's a decision that we came to together before we got married. We would not be married if it was not for our relationship, our individual relationships with God, in our joint relationship with God. It's something that we discussed very early on. You know, my mom always says that people should spend just as much time, they should spend more time planning their marriage than they do the wedding. And unfortunately, in our world, that works backwards. My husband and I only spent 2 weeks planning the wedding, but we spent quite a bit of time. I know, right? That's a whole other story for another day, but we spent quite a bit of time just talking about our marriage and how we wanted things to work. And God was definitely at the center of that. And it was because of both of our relationships, you know, with God and with our faith.
Wow, that's simply amazing. Now, I'm going to paint a picture for the listeners. So March 2020, the world as we know it stopped, right? And of course, all of us experienced the same storm, but we were all in different boats, right? Some of us were in yacht, and some of us were in rowboat. And some of us may have been out in the waters, right? Just trying to survive
like this, right?
It's a life that maybe or maybe not.
Right.
But so talk about the ultimate life jack, right, for everyone. And yes, and you mentioned that you experienced not just the difficult time within the pandemic, but you experienced a difficult time coming out of the pandemic. Can you describe what exactly were you experiencing, and when did you recognize that something was not quite right?
Yeah. So the pandemic, I can tell you, I remember date like it was yesterday. The last day that I was in the office of my previous job when the pandemic hit was March 12th. That was the last day. During that week, we had talked about, going home for a couple of weeks, making sure our systems could manage us being at home working. And it never crossed my mind that that Thursday would be the last day for, well over a year and a half. It might have been 2 years, right? That I would walk into my office door. I remember it because March 16th is my wedding anniversary, and I always take that day off. So I had taken that day off work, but we were in what I'm going to call crisis mode. We had hired a bunch of people. At the time, I was working in learning and development. People were starting, and we had to figure out how to flip our training classes from in-person classes to online classes. We were trying to figure out how to get people equipment and all of those things. And I remember my husband, I had a meeting that kicked off that morning. I said, I'm just going to take this meeting and then we'll go celebrate our anniversary. And I remember he kept coming to the door like, how much longer? How much longer? And I ended up working that entire day. And that is pretty much what the entire pandemic looked like for me, no matter where in my life it was. So work was nonstop, but I also felt like I had to take care of everybody around me. So it was nonstop, making sure the kids were okay, creating things for the kids to do in the house. So I was doing things like creating jobs for the kids, and we were doing fun job interviews, and I was paying them to do the jobs, and we were having family movie nights. And then with their cousins, we did, when it got warm outside, we were doing camping sleepovers, and we were in the backyard, and I was in overdrive trying to make sure that everybody was okay. And I did that for a month, not thinking about myself, but I needed to make sure that everybody else was okay. And so when the pandemic started to slow and things we started to try to get back to normal, right? People were going back into offices. My kids spent a year and a half in virtual school. Well, my daughter was a freshman when the pandemic hit. By the time she went back to school, she was driving. So there were just so many things that had changed, but we were trying to go back to life as normal. And all of a sudden, I didn't have control of everything. I never really had control, but I felt like I did. And I started to feel myself spiraling coming out of the pandemic because I never addressed myself in the pandemic, if that makes sense. And I just started to feel like I started to feel different. I didn't feel happy. I didn't love what I was doing at work anymore. I had been on my job with a particular company for years, and I no longer enjoyed what I was doing at a place that I was very passionate about. I loved the people that I worked with often, sometimes not, but often, people I worked with most of the time. I had very strong relationships, but I just no longer cared. And it felt like I was no longer caring about a lot. And so I started to talk to my physician who said, we need to get you in some behavioral health. And thank God for him and my therapist. Then I was able to get a diagnosis and put some vocabulary to what I was experiencing.
So let me ask you this. And of course, I'm assuming that's the time that you received the diagnosis of anxiety and severe depression, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
And so hearing that, what were your immediate thoughts and feelings?
Yeah. Immediately, I felt two warring emotions. I felt relief because I could start to understand what was happening to me. And at the same time, I felt fear and shame because as an executive, I didn't believe that I could go and say, this is what I'm experiencing and still garner the same respect in my position. So I felt relief that I could help myself. And then I was extremely afraid. I spent quite a bit of that next 4 or 5 days trying to figure out, how do I handle this?
It's amazing how with mental health, like I think that as a culture, we just cannot seem to wrap our mind around that mental health really is real. And then when we realize that we can't operate at a certain capacity level, which is most times something that we've imposed, that level, if we've imposed it on ourselves.
Yeah, I will tell you, I wrote in my book, I had to go to the doctor. I took a leave from work and I had to go to the doctor. And I was really struggling because I needed to go near where I was working. And I was very afraid that I was going to run into somebody that I knew. And they were going to say, well, she looks fine. And why isn't she working? And I said, but if somebody had knee surgery or if someone had, like I've had other surgeries, right, internally that you couldn't see and I had to go for a checkup, that would never cross my mind. It would just be, I got to go to the doctor. So it should be the same with our mental health, just as human beings. If we need to care for ourselves, and we should not feel fear for going to the doctor.
So what kinds of things did you do once you received your diagnosis to move yourself forward?
Yeah. To begin with, I didn't. I spent a lot of time crying. I spent a lot of time just processing what I was hearing. Then I pushed into, I'm a researcher, right? So I started reading. And then I found myself trying to justify what I was going through. I still have it in my phone, and I put some excerpts of it in my book. I found myself trying to justify what was going on. So I started keeping up with my emotions, not for myself, but just in case anyone asks, so I could justify why I was off. So I was trying to process all of those things. Eventually, I realized, no, you have to fight for you, and it is fine. It's fine for you to do absolutely nothing. You're almost 50 years old, and you can't point to a day in your life where you've done nothing unless you were sick. You deserve to rest. So I started to have that internal dialogue with myself. And then one of the things that my therapist recommended was that I write. Writing has always been amazing for me. It's always helped me deal with emotions. I remember being a little girl and sliding notes under my parents' door when I was in trouble because I was processing emotion. And so I just started to write. And I wrote about all types of things. I wrote about my childhood. I wrote about my family. I wrote about work. I just wrote about all types of things. And the more I wrote, the better I felt. And then I started to think about, how I got where I was and what my part in that was. I think oftentimes we try to figure out, what everybody else did or what the world did. I wanted to think about my part in that so that I never went back to that. And once I understood it, I started to create a strategy for myself. What is life going to look like after this? Because this is not the end. My husband and I talked and he said, I really don't want for you. You do so much. I don't want your story to just be anxiety and depression. And I said, I don't either. So, I started to strategize about what do I do? And while I'm not ashamed of it, there is so much more to Ebony than anxiety and depression, So we started to strategize and then we made some decisions and I made some pivots and I decided that God brought me through this for a reason. And that reason was to help others in their same place. And eventually I took my journals and I turned them into a book, which was really cool for me because that was the first step in being transparent with the world because I never even told my boss what was happening. I understood the law and I simply said, I have some health concerns that I need to take care of. In hindsight, I wish I had have been more courageous in that moment, but I am courageous enough now to talk about it.
You mentioned the concept of high functioning anxiety. So what is the difference between high functioning anxiety and then other forms or just a regular form of anxiety? How are they different?
Yeah, so high functioning anxiety in and of itself is not an official diagnosis, but a subset of general anxiety disorder. And basically the difference is sometimes you can look at people and tell they're experiencing anxiety or they can't function because they're experiencing anxiety. Where in the case of high functioning anxiety, you would never be able to tell because the person is functioning at an extremely high level. They're accomplishing goals, they're winning awards, they're doing all of these things, and they're presenting to the world as almost perfect, right? And pushing for perfection for themselves to try to push the feelings of falling apart that are inside underneath. So it's kind of, I call it that sneaky anxiety where no one would know. You can actually hide it. And I did for quite a long time because nobody would look at me and say, she's anxious. I'm addressing crowds of 20,000 people. I'm doing, I'm getting on streaming shows and talking to our entire organization. I'm actually leading thousands of people. Okay, so no one would look at me and say, well, she has anxiety because I was just performing at an extremely high level. But on the inside, I was literally falling apart.
Wow, it's amazing how we can think we have it all together, right? And not, like you said, people could look at you and think, oh my gosh, she's doing this, she's doing that, she's doing this, and she's got it all together. When you're essentially crumbling on the inside and no one knows that. That's amazing. Now, you've talked about your husband, you spoke about him earlier, and he was instrumental in your healing journey and provided that support. So how important is it for everyone to have a support system within their own recovery?
I think it is beyond important. And here's the thing, it does not have to be a spouse. It doesn't have to be a parent. It's got to be someone who you trust and who wants to see you heal. One person that I didn't mention who is a huge support to me is my best friend. My best friend is a psychologist and she can't, of course, work with me, right? That would be unethical. She can't do that, but she can be a friend, right? She can be there for me. So sometimes it's your best friend.
Right.
Sometimes and she didn't even know what all I was going through because I was hiding it from her as well. Sometimes it's, a sister circle at church, but I think you have to get to a point that you can trust someone and you can release. You've got to be able to release. I am huge on therapy, which I know some people find shocking because I am the child of two ministers, but I believe God gave us therapists for a reason. And so I'm huge on therapy. I don't think therapy replaces your pastor, but I think it is simply in addition to, right? When you look at therapists, they've studied the mind, they've studied how the mind works, where your pastor may or may not have, right? Some have, but they may not have. They've studied faith. They've studied how faith works, and you have to combine the two. So I think it's extremely important to have a very strong support system because there are going to be days where you don't recognize what's happening. I remember going to my brother's house and he said, "Hey, how you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm okay." I said, "I'm not doing much, but I think that's what I'm supposed to be doing." And so I said to him, I said, "Right now I feel like I'm kind of in a Spike Lee movie and things are moving around me and I'm not frozen. I can tell what's happening, but I just can't get into the action." And he said to me, "They call that an existential crisis, right?" And I'm like, "Man, do they?"
Whoa.
Right. And so, I was able to talk to him, but he was curious. He wanted to know. I think it's important that our support systems want to know as well. It was like, hey, I want to know what's going on with my sister at the very core so that I can help. So we need support systems and they can be found. I think a lot of times people, feel like they are by themselves, especially as Black women. I spoke this weekend and I let them know you got to tell somebody. We typically don't tell folks as we walk into room after room corporately what's going on with us because no one looks like us or very few, and we don't believe they'll understand our plight. We don't tell our families because we're their wildest dreams come true. And we don't tell our sister circles because sometimes we're ashamed and other times we're in competition when we should be collaborating. And so we don't talk. You've got to talk to somebody. You've got to have a support system that we can talk to.
Oh, wow. Absolutely. Now you have this concept, which is the power of the pause. Can you elaborate on what exactly does that mean?
Yes, absolutely. So oftentimes we are just going. We go and go and go, and we lose sight of essentially ourselves. But we lose sight oftentimes of what we set out to accomplish. We're just going. Like when I told you, I found myself in this space where I didn't even love what I did anymore. I was just doing it. I was just this executive in this organization just going. I had lost sight of why I was even there in the first place, why I had pushed so hard for the education, why I had pushed so hard to climb the ladder, why I had pushed for the things that I wanted, because I got addicted to just pushing for those things versus moving, or I say the word addicted, I became, that's a strong word, but maybe that is the word, that is almost, you get addicted to those things and you lose yourself. So I suggest pausing, and pausing is just the first step of the framework. And pausing may be for a few hours. It may be for a day. It may be for weeks. It may be for 6 months, depending on what it is that you're going through. It is the first step of the framework. And then the framework walks you through analyzing where you are and understanding it. It helps you to strategize and eventually to execute on that strategy to put you back in a place where you are now accomplishing things that you want to accomplish, where you are living life and you're not allowing life to live you. Because we can get in those spaces where life is just living us. We're not living life.
Well, no, absolutely. I think I've been in some moments at times in my life where I think life absolutely was just living me. Like I just showed up. I was almost like a robot. And
Right.
luckily I've snapped out of it, a few times, but I definitely know what you're talking about. So because of that, do you think that resilience is misunderstood at times?
Oh, absolutely. I think sometimes people see resilience as just continuing to push through. And I see resilience as getting through, but it doesn't mean you just keep going. Sometimes you have got to pause. You've got to stop. You've got to pull away. It's not about just pushing forward. Sometimes you got to slow down to go fast. And so I think resilience is extremely misunderstood. I think resilience replaces some of the other words that we've used in the past that give a negative connotation to taking care of self. I think you cannot be resilient unless you take care of self. I don't think you can be resilient unless you slow down sometimes. I don't think you can be resilient unless you pause and think through things. So I think it's very misunderstood. I think resilient is less about just continuing to push through to get to the other side and more about getting to the other side by utilizing tactics like pausing to help you get there.
I never thought about that, being so true, but it is because I just think about, and what it's like to go through a doctoral program is insane, right? And
Oh my goodness. Yes, I was just talking about that the other day. Going
yeah,
through a doctoral program is insane. You're right. It's one of the loneliest, hardest things you can do.
absolutely. And so I was thinking that, a lot of listeners do not know, but it took me about almost 7 years to get through my program, mostly just because a lot of stuff was happening, life stuff. I was being life stacked left and right. But,
Right.
I, I went through 2 semesters. I was in school, but I wasn't really doing any work. And I would check in with my dissertation chair. And luckily, I had the best dissertation chair in the world. He was very patient with me. But I realized at some moment, I was like, I gotta stop. And I would tell people, I gotta pause for a moment. I gotta stop. I gotta pause. And they would be like, no, no, don't stop. You've gone so far and we don't want you to quit. And I knew I wasn't gonna quit, right? But I just was like, but this is not working. Like I'm in a semester paying a lot of money and doing no work. So
Right.
it was just
Yep.
like, no. But you're right. So once I paused, right? I paused. I took 1 semester, paused. I was not in school. I just took a step back and I just said, let me take a break. And then
Yes.
got back in school and then I finished. So you're
Yes.
right. Like the pause is absolutely true.
If you think about it, so that is a great example. I went through the exact same thing, right? Almost 7 years to get through my program. And I remember talking to people like, what's going on? And they're like, just keep going. And I'm like, yeah, go on what? I can't even think straight right now. I don't know. I don't want to code anything. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. So, but just like you, when and you're spending a lot of money, right, to do nothing, like you said.
Yes.
But when you pull away, this concept of stopping, it's something that I wish I'd have done really listened more. Like my daughter said to me, I need a break from school when she graduated from high school. And I was like, no, 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 keep going. But really, this concept of a gap year is not a bad idea. You've been doing the same thing for 13 years. Sometimes you got to pull away for a moment before you can go back at it. Or, I know there's some jobs that require sabbatical. I think that's ingenious to require a sabbatical because people come back refreshed.
Yeah.
And so I talk about even organizations need to pause sometimes. I think sometimes that's why organizations make bad decisions because they're just going, going, going. And it's like, hold on for a minute. Give your people some rest. Maybe, circulate sabbaticals amongst your senior leaders and you can come back even stronger. I'm going to get into faith just a little bit because I'm strong in my faith. My faith means the world to me. But when I think about God creating the earth and God resting, I remember my nephew said to me, Auntie, do you find it funny that people think that God needed to rest? God was resting to give us an example. I was like, you're right. You're absolutely right. God didn't, I mean, he created the entire world. It wasn't like he needed to go take a nap. He was giving us an example of how we should live our lives. We've got to stop sometimes.
And speaking of God resting, I love that. I love that analogy. I love that. I mean, if God can rest, then why
Right.
can't we? I love that. I love that. So what role do you feel in speaking about this? I mean, this goes right into my next question. What role does spirituality play in your life, and how has it supported you through your struggles with mental health?
It's huge. And I think that I read something that said, how can you call yourself a Christian and say you suffer from anxiety or you suffered from depression? And I thought, well, how can you call yourself a Christian and say that you suffered from cancer? They are ailments, and God didn't say life is going to be easy, right? He said that he would be there for us. And so my spirituality plays a huge part. And there were times that, I was not talking to God the way I should, but I know that it is him that did not leave me. I know that is the reason that I got through. I know that in those moments that I couldn't think for myself, he was thinking for me. And it is because of him that I was on autopilot and things were happening. It wasn't autopilot, it was God pilot helping me get through these things, right? Because there are times that I can't tell you how I accomplished some of the things I accomplished. It had to be God. It wasn't me. So I am extremely grateful. Even if, now I'm in a better place, and I recognize that life won't be perfect, and I can find myself back in in dealing with anxiety again or dealing with depression again. I know that life is not perfect, but even this weekend, I asked God to use me. Just use me however you see fit. And sometimes God uses us in ways that we don't expect. So, I have always wanted to write a book. And I have a book, Dr. Rowe, outlined on the wall of my office that is still there because he saw fit for this book to come out and be utilized. And so it played a huge part in my life. I go where I feel like God is leading me. And so hopefully I'll get back to that leadership book one day, but this book was important to come out.
Yes. So for the listeners who may be leaders in corporate settings, because you mentioned this before that you wish you had the courage to tell your boss really what was going on, but a lot of times we don't feel safe, right, to tell our bosses what is going on because of maybe shame or judgment, what you mentioned. But how do you think organizations can better support mental health and resilience among their employees?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it has to be talked about more often. We've got to drop the stigma, and I think the more that senior executives talk about it, the more that the entire teams, all employees will feel better speaking of it. I know, and there's research out there are a lot of executives that suffer with all types of mental and emotional issues, but they're not talking about it because we don't feel like the respect will be there. I think we've got to find the courage to talk about it. And I can say with full confidence that the leader I had in the moment was not the issue for me because I trusted her wholeheartedly. It was all the others around, right? All the other leaders and all the other people in the organization that I wasn't sure I could trust. I think people have to talk about it. And then I think organizations have to make a way for people to step back and deal with what they need to deal with. We step back. There's a way for us to step back and deal with everything else. And I think it should be just as respected as anything else. You know, I had surgery probably about 2017, I want to say, and multiple emails and cards and gifts and people checking on me and all of that. When I walked away to deal with my mental health, I didn't tell anybody what was going on, but people knew I wasn't there. I got very few cards, if any. Got a couple of, let me check on you from some really close people. My boss was one of them. But it was just like, oh, she's gone. Well, no, let's talk about it. So I really wish if I had it all to do over again, I would talk about it more, but I'm talking about it now, and I think organizations need to make a way to talk about it so we can remove the stigma that goes along with it.
Yes. Well, Dr. Stone, it's hard to believe that this conversation, our time is up, because I have enjoyed this so much. so
Me
much.
as well. My dad just happened to bless up at the clock.
Well, thank you for sharing your inspiring journey with us today. Your story of resilience and healing not only sheds light on the challenges many face, but also offers hope and practical strategies for those seeking to overcome their own struggles with depression and anxiety. I appreciate your insights and the powerful framework you've developed, pause, to help others harness the power of the pause. How can listeners find and connect with you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So listeners can connect with me on my website. It is www.drebonystone.com. So that's drebonystone.com. I am on all the social platforms as Dr. Ebony Stone, so they can connect with me there. You can always email me at ebony@drebonystone.com. The book, you can read the book. It is on all major platforms. I even did an audiobook, which was a cool experience. So it's on Audible, it's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you want to get a book, it is there. And then, I do offer some services that if someone is interested, they can reach out to me and I can help them through it. Kicking off group coaching after the beginning of the year to create community and harness the power of pause.
Awesome. Any last words of encouragement for the listeners?
Yes. Remember to live life and to not let life live you.
Yes, live life. Don't let it live you. I love it. Thank you again, Dr. Stone, for being a source of encouragement and guidance in this conversation about mental health and resilience on Life Jack, the Resilience podcast. I wish you and your family nothing but blessings and abundance. Please take care.
Thank you so much for having me, and I wish the same for you.
Dr. Ebony Stone, everyone, be sure to join us next time for more uplifting stories and insights on resilience. Until then, keep pushing forward, embrace the journey, and remember that every setback can lead to a greater comeback. Dr. Rowe, signing off.